questions that you have for Dr. Miller.
I have a question, and it may come up tonight, but it goes back to her point about the oil. She said you don't want to swallow because it has bad bacteria from the mouth. And again, you might touch on this tonight. And if you cover it tonight, that's okay, but at least put it out there now. I know oftentimes we hear about good bacteria and bad bacteria in the stomach. People here in Japan are known for eating natto and other things for good bacteria that for your stomach. But if it's something that you're going to talk about tonight, I'll wait. Because, well, the question is, well, the processes in which they receive this bacteria is, it has to be a fermentation process, like natto. Okay.
Children who play out in dirt, are building up their immune system. They're going to build some good bacteria in their bodies. And it's not so much the bacteria in your stomach. Your hydrochloric acid is going to pretty much take care of those. It's the ones in your intestinal tract that we're really looking at.
Well, the other reason I brought it up is because of the fermentation thing. You know, because usually with fermentation, I was under the impression we try and stay away from things with fermentation.
Yeah, we try to stay away from it. But there's certain things we do therapeutically that we do not do on a daily basis. If a person takes a course of antibiotics, they've killed off their good bacteria. That's why they get yeast infections, because good bacteria keeps the yeast down. And so for those people, we recommend take a probiotic. Now you can get a capsule with probiotics, or you can just eat some natto, which I wouldn't eat with my toes, but I would eat other, tempura. We'll have, probiotics in there, or miso.
What was that stuff that you was growing?
Oh, we can talk about that later. So, last question, just something to think about. What are the 3 stages in memory? 3 stages in memory. And then we'll have the pastor come and give us opening prayer. And Marco's going to give us opening prayer. 3 stages of memory. Okay. Concentration. Are we concentrating now? Organization and who? Who? Retrieval. Is that correct? I didn't have retrieval, but I did have meditation. You guys did an awesome job. Awesome job. You should celebrate by giving yourself a big round of applause.
Okay, we're going to go ahead and have a short word of prayer, and then we're going to go ahead and turn it over to Dr. Miller here tonight. At this time, let us go ahead and bow our heads. Merciful Father, Lord, we just want to give you praise and thanks as we move into the 3rd night of the Health Emphasis Week. And Lord, we just want to praise and thank you for our presenters here tonight and all the wealth of knowledge that we received thus far, but also for the opportunity to put a lot of this new information, this new knowledge into our practical application in our own life. And so, Lord, we invite you to join us tonight and ask that you be with Dr. Miller, but also be with those who may still be en route here. These things we ask, O Lord, in the name of your Son, Jesus. Amen.
Time goes fast in Okinawa. I'm halfway done with my talk already and haven't even started it. We're talking about behavior tonight. And, you know, behavior, bad behavior is not a disease. We treat it like a disease now. When I was a child in school, no one had ADHD. You know what we had in school? Principals had paddles. And when you misbehaved, you had to bend over and you got a paddle, and you were no longer going to misbehave for a while. Not that there is not a clinical thing called ADHD, but it's just I think we have made it into a channel for giving more drugs to children. You look at certain people who live down through the ages. Some people you're going to be familiar. Well, you'll be familiar with most of these people here. Does anyone know that guy? Albert Einstein. They told him, you can't learn. He had ADHD, what we would call it. He was he couldn't keep his attention span. He was just a very poor student. Of course, it turns out he was a genius. Everyone knows about Walt Disney, same way. He was a loser in school, but he was just so creative and had so much inside of him that had to get out, that he was bringing it out. John Fitzgerald Kennedy, or I think it's, the 35th president of the United States, was also a very hyperactive child. Thankfully, they didn't put him on drugs. I think everyone knows this guy. He's won more gold medals in the Olympics than anybody else ever. But he was diagnosed with ADHD. He was in that age when you did get diagnosed. Thankfully, he didn't succumb to the medications. Thomas Edison, he did not invent the light bulb, he perfected the light bulb. He failed 9,999 times. It was on the 10,000th time that he finally got it right. But here's what they told him when he was in school. You are too stupid to learn anything. Thomas Edison, a great inventor. How about Beethoven? You ever heard of Beethoven? When he was in university, one of his teachers says, you are hopeless as a composer. You realize he composed his last 5 symphonies completely deaf? A brilliant man. Michael Jordan, he was cut from his high school's basketball team. He wasn't good enough. But we know all about him. He did many great things. He's a great basketball player. So basically we're looking at, we can't judge a person by the way they're behaving. I put in these two statements here because I think they're very important. One, the first one says, if you think you can do something, you're right. You can do it. But the other side is equally as true. If you think you cannot do something, you're right. You can't do it. Everything is in our minds. We talked about how 90% of diseases begin in the mind. So we're going to be talking a little bit about the mind tonight, and starting off with some very short physiology of the mind. And it really comes from a story about 1849. They're making a railroad track through the mountains of the New England part of the United States. And there was an accident. And there was an explosion, and an iron bar about 2 meters long flew through that man's head. He's holding the bar in his hand right there. It caught him underneath the left cheekbone, went behind his eye, and came out the top of his head. But he got back up again. He could talk, he could remember, everything was exactly the same except for one thing, the part of our brain that controls our behavior, and that's the frontal lobe. We've got basically 2 hemispheres with lobes on each side. We've got the occipital, the parietal, and the frontal, temporal lobes, and they all have their certain functions. But then we've got the frontal lobe of the brain. That's the crown of the brain, the most important part. We've got our spirituality, our morality, our willpower there. It's there that we have what's called the decision to make the right choices, which is what we need to do. Now that man, when he had the accident, the only thing that was different was his character was gone. He had been a good family man. He never smoked, he never drank, he never used profanity. After that, all that stuff. He never went back to his family. He became a drinker. He became a very poor worker. Finally, well, he just got fired from his job because he just couldn't do it anymore because the frontal lobe was damaged. So let's look at some of the signs of frontal lobe impairment, because this is where your character and your behavior is coming from. So here's some of them. Easily distracted or irritable. This is going to be one of the signs of frontal lobe damage. A person who has apathy all the time. Inability to think rationally. Now I'm going to go down the list and we're going to look at an example of someone who had brain damage at birth. Inability to think rationally. Mania. Talk too much. They just are manic about things, like obsessive compulsive disorder. People who just fixate on one thing and they got to do it over and over again. Depression can be caused by frontal lobe damage. ADHD is a sign of frontal lobe damage. And then all of these eating disorders, like bulimia and people who binge and purge and all those things. Eating disorders are caused by frontal lobe damage. Lack of control and appetite leads to many other problems. Now, it wasn't that long ago, as a matter of fact, in 1949, a doctor won the Nobel Prize for coming up with an easy way to do what's called a frontal lobotomy. Does anyone know what a frontal lobotomy is? That's when they turn the frontal lobe off. And how he did that, he'd take something like an ice pick. He'd go next to the eye, put it behind the eye, hit it with a hammer, breaking that little piece of bone between the skull and the frontal lobe, and then he'd just move it around. Frontal lobe was gone, no longer worked again. And they did that. People could go into a doctor and have that as elective surgery. People don't like their nose, they can go to a doctor and have their nose fixed. People could do that. So a woman, she was a nurse at a hospital, she was having some problems with guilt. This guilty conscience was always there. And she figured, if I can just get rid of this frontal lobe, I won't be bothered by this particular problem. Now, she was she was head of the nurses in the surgical ward. She loved to read books, head of a reading society. She loved her patients, a very, very good worker. That was before the operation. But just before she went into the operation, somebody asked her a question. And this was the question. If you borrowed somebody's watch and you lost it, what would you do? Her answer, I'd have to buy them another watch. Well, that's a reasonable answer. I like that answer. After the surgery, she had lost all of her ambition. She would only do the very minimum of work. She lost all interest in reading, all interest in patients. She was just a very low-scale worker now. But someone asked her the same question. If you borrowed somebody's watch and you lost it, what would you do? And you know what she said? I guess I'd have to borrow another watch. Her frontal lobe was gone, and that's what happened to her. Now, many times children can be damaged in the birthing process, especially when they use those horrible forceps and clamp onto the head and pull them out of the mother. That can damage the frontal lobe if they don't do it right. So this is falling. This is not just one child. This seems to be the pattern on children who've had frontal lobe damage in childbirth. One, they're unresponsive to discipline. Now, as we look at these symptoms of children with frontal lobe damage, ask yourself, does this sound like anybody I know? Because you don't have to have it damaged. There's many other ways of damaging your frontal lobe than through the birthing process. Unresponsive to discipline. Wanted their satisfaction meant now. No patience. I want to be satisfied now. They had very few friends, if any at all. They just could not make friends. They were easily influenced into doing risky or wrong and unhealthy behaviors. When they did do something wrong and got caught, they always blamed somebody else. And that, you see this all the time. It's the teacher's fault, it's the policeman's fault, it's my father's fault, it's somebody else's fault. The fault does not fall on me. They are irresponsible. Whoops, went backwards. Irresponsible. And the last one of many, but it's going to be the last one I show you, is something we're seeing more and more. How about bisexual or transsexual or polysexual, whatever you're going to call it now, because it used to just be bisexual. There you go, pansexual, which, hey, a lot of things going wrong with our brains today. Factors leading to frontal lobe disease or impairment. So we're going to look at some of the factors. Now we realize that drugs are going to do it, right? You're going to take morphine, you're going to take cocaine, you're going to take opium. It's going to affect your frontal lobe. Now none of us would ever do that. Although, you know, in the state that I live in, it's one of the biggest problems they have with young people is the opioid epidemic and heroin use in high school. Young kids taking heroin. But now, we're going to look at 3 ways that we can damage our frontal lobe. We're going to go 2 ways. Things that we put through the mouth, things that we put through the eyes, and then usually I would talk about things we put through the ears. We won't even get enough chance to probably get past the mouth tonight. But we're going to look at the mouth because we've got to find out what do we do, and this is especially for children, but it can be applied to every single one of us. 90% of cow's milk is casein. Okay, that's the protein in cow's milk. When you drink milk and it gets down to the stomach, as with everything that you eat, it has to break it down. What is casein broken down to when it gets into the stomach is a thing called casomorphin. Does morphin sound familiar? Like morphine. It is an opiate. It breaks down into an opiate in a person's body. And now there are many doctors now figuring out that probably one of the major causes for autism and ADHD is milk consumption. It's the casein in milk. What's the best way to get around that? Just don't drink it. Just don't drink it. Now, when I was a child, there were no other options. Or you could probably get goat milk, but it was just cow's milk. Now, there are so many different types of milk out there. There's no reason why we're still taking that fluid. And I'll be giving you better reasons tonight for saying, okay, I just drank my last glass of milk. All right, common drugs, medicinal drugs. We're not talking about illegal drugs. We're talking about legal drugs that doctors prescribe or we buy over the counter that will affect their frontal lobe. How about asthma medications? Yeah, you know someone with asthma? See, here's the problem. Rather than give them a medication, why don't we find a way to cure the asthma? Does that make more sense? Cure it rather than treat the symptom. Blood pressure medications affect the frontal lobe. Tranquilizers and sleeping pills are going to affect the frontal lobe. Especially it's going to take away the most important sleep, which is called the rapid eye movement sleep. When you take a drug to sleep, you don't get that sleep, which means you're not getting a good night of rest. Anti-ulcer pills. My idea there is let's cure the ulcer and quit doing what it caused us to get the ulcer in the first place. One of the best things there is eating cabbage. Anti-inflammatory drugs. If a person has pain, they're going to be prescribed an anti-inflammatory. Now, we've talked about a natural anti-inflammatory. Does anyone remember what it was? Curcuma or turmeric. Natural anti-inflammatory, and amani, flaxseed, we talked about last night. Pain relievers, other types of pain relieving things like narcotics, all will affect your frontal lobe. Cold and allergy medications. We take those things like popcorn. We get an allergy and we take a medication because we are bothered by the symptom. We need to find a way to strengthen our immune system so we're no longer fighting our allergies. I know people, and I'm one of them, I'm allergic to nothing. I try to keep my immune system strong. All right, those are medicinal drugs. But one of the most common accepted drugs that almost every single person here has taken, and some of you may still be taking, are things containing caffeine. Caffeine is a drug, and it has a profound effect upon the frontal lobe. All right, some of the effects of caffeine upon the brain. One, it's addictive. If any of you have ever drank coffee, you realize when you quit drinking coffee, you were addicted to it. You went through all of the withdrawal symptoms of an addictive substance. Withdrawal symptoms, it can worsen psychiatric illnesses. There is a head of a mental hospital, Dr. Agatha Thrash, who I worked with for many years. She went to this doctor's office in his mental hospital, and he told her this: if we would just remove all the caffeine from this hospital, 80% of the people could go home normal. So the question is, just remove it. Why don't you just remove it? You just don't do that. Anyway, it makes psychiatric illnesses worse, impairs physical and mental performance. Dr. Agatha always talked about a study she read. Those people who drink coffee do not advance as far in their careers and climb the ladder as high as those who stay away from that drug. Interferes with sleep. We talked about that last night, about the adenosine building up, and the body's got to clean it out. And then it can cause spiritual and social impact. If you're drinking coffee and you want to get off and you know you're addicted to it, here's a suggestion. Make a cup of coffee. Put it in the refrigerator. Every time you start to feel that, I gotta have some coffee, take 1 spoonful of the cold coffee. You're getting just a tiny bit of the caffeine, which will get you over the withdrawal symptom, and you're okay for a while, and then when it comes back, you take another, and usually before you've emptied the cup, a teaspoon at a time, you'll be over the addiction. Then you're dealing with just the fact that that's what you're used to doing. You're used to having your hand like this with the coffee cup in it. I mentioned, I think the other night, about if a child drinks a caffeinated beverage, it's equal to an adult drinking 4 cups of coffee. And 4 cups of coffee is going to change the behavior of anybody who drinks that much coffee. ADHD is found to be indistinguishable from a caffeine allergy. Now, what's the favorite caffeine-containing thing that we put through our mouth? Chocolate. It's the favorite one we put through our, and almost every child. I was sitting in a meeting in Ukraine one time, and I was sitting on the 3rd row back, and there was a man on the front row he was sitting right here with his child on his lap. The child was just as calm as he could be. And then I saw the father reach into his pocket, and I saw him pull out a chocolate bar. And I knew the picture was getting ready to change. He unwrapped the bar, and he gave that to his son. It wasn't 5 minutes before the father had to take the child out of the meeting because he was being disruptive. You cannot put sugar in a child's body and expect normal behavior. Matter of fact, they did studies with rats. I love this study. The first group, they had 3 groups of rats. The first group, they gave the typical teenager's diet. A lot of processed foods, a lot of fast foods, a lot of monosodium glutamate. They were giving these rats that food, and they had 2 choices of water. All 3 groups had the same 2 choices: pure water, and then water with just 10% alcohol added to it. Just enough to taste the alcohol. And then they measured how often the rats drank the alcohol beverage. How often was it? It was 52.9% of the time. Now, if you're a thinking person, say, well, that's about 50-50. The rats don't know the difference. Well, then we go to the second group of rats. They were receiving laboratory food made for laboratory rats. Same two choices. They went to the alcohol 18% of the time. Yeah. And then they went to the third group of rats. That was the vegetarian rat group. Same two groups, choices. They went to the alcohol 2.7% of the time. Big, big difference. So what did they learn from the study? When you take something stimulating in your diet, it causes the body to desire something more stimulating. And alcohol is more stimulating than just plain old H2O. Sugar and the frontal lobe. It impairs, any sugar at all will impair frontal lobe function. A child, and I mentioned this the other night, a child should never have sugar in their bodies. Basically, one thing, sugar is a developed taste. I've been off sugar for a long, long time. I could not eat a candy bar, it's just too sweet. I remember I was at my brother-in-law's office, and it was a fireworks display that night, and I was thirsty, and all I had was cans of soda, so I got fruit punch. I figured fruit punch, that should be close. Took the top, one sip, I had to put it away. Too much sugar. If a child does not take sugar in their body before the 11th year of their life, they never get a dental cavity. How many like Oreo cookies? A big study done in the University of Connecticut says it's as addictive as morphine and cocaine. Oreo cookies. What was the issue? The fat and the sugar content. So anything that's high in fat and high in sugar is going to be addictive. What is your favorite high fat, high sugar confection? I used to love ice cream. That's high fat and it's high sugar. Another thing that we put through our mouths that's going to affect our frontal lobe is food additives. In America, we've got over 3,000 of them. Here in Japan, it's just under 500. But it's interesting, they've got on the list about 119 they're going to take off the list of approved additives, which means they found something wrong with them, which means for the last who knows how many years, people have been eating 119 food additives that are bad for their bodies. And my idea is that there's probably not one safe food additive. We need to get back to eating just straight food the way God prepared it without all the additives, all those colorings and the flavorings and the preservatives. Refined sugar. When you eat a large sugar meal, you eat your sugar snack, just eating a Hershey bar, that's a lot of sugar. I was asked earlier, what's glucose? Basically, it breaks, sucrose is glucose and glucose together, right? So basically, you got yourself a big sugar smack there. It gets into the body, it digests very quickly, it spikes your sugar, which means your pancreas is going to spike the insulin, and which means it's going to take it quickly out of the bloodstream into the cells, as long as you don't have diabetes yet. But now, what happens when the insulin, that huge amount of insulin, takes all the glucose out of the blood? What happens to your blood flow now? Now you've got hypoglycemia. Not hyper, it's hypo. And when you have hypoglycemia, it's going to affect the frontal lobe of the brain. That's sugar low, you know, and that's a bad thing to have happen to a person. And those people who eat a lot of refined sugar, it's going to affect their behavior. That's what we're talking about, behavior and character. When it affects their behavior, you do stupid things. Now, you do this also with alcohol, but you do stupid things that you're going to end up regretting later. There was a man who committed murder, and I think it was in Florida some years ago. He committed murder. His defense, this was his defense, and it's called, there's a name for it now. It's called the Twinkie defense. How many of you have ever eaten a Twinkie? You know what a Twinkie is? It's a little snack cake they make. It's white stuff with white stuff inside of it. And he says, I eat a lot of sugar and that changed my behavior. That was the defense for his case. And I'm pretty sure he got a light sentence because he says, we can buy that. Let's say you've got a child or a grandchild or a niece or a nephew who's been on sugar and you say, we're going to take you off that stuff. What's he going to do? He's going to complain. He's got to have it. And he'll cry. In America, they'll fall down right in the middle of a store and start kicking the floor and crying until finally the parent gives in. Okay, here it is. And they give it to them, and then it affects their frontal lobe, and now it's causing strange things to happen to their body, and this goes on again and again and again. We just got to get to the point where we stop it. But again, this is a very stimulating food. Sugar is a very stimulating food. It puts it into, you put it into the body, and now the body wants something more stimulating. And so it might go, now we're going to start drinking the really high sugar and caffeine beverages, which is going to be even more stimulating, but that's not going to be stimulating enough after a while. What's the next step? The next step is going to be alcohol. Now we just got to have this stuff. And what's the next step? A young person who does not have enough experience in life is now taking alcohol, which is really going to change the frontal lobe of the brain. And now we're going to start seeing they're going to start becoming famous. We're going to see them appearing in different places. They put the wanted posters. That's where it goes. Many people, matter of fact, many marriages start to crumble at the wedding cake. You understand? You know, they got this huge, great big wedding cake, and you pig out at the wedding cake, and all that sugar affects the minds, and then these two people, well, nowadays they've already lived together for a while, but they say they've never lived together, never been together, and all of a sudden they're together really close, and their frontal lobes aren't working right, and all of a sudden you got your first argument. And that's what Dr. Agatha used to say, is probably because of the wedding cake. Yes, sir.
It seemed like the sugar, that's a big deal regardless where you go. And it seemed like part of the problem is sugar has so many different names. How do you recognize and filter out
Yeah.
what is actually?
You have to be a chemist to read ingredients nowadays. They hide milk in 1,000 places. Sugar comes under. Matter of fact, usually when I look at an ingredient, if the first, second, third, or fourth ingredient is sugar, I'm not going to get it. But you got to read all the ingredients. And the fourth one might be sugar, and the fifth one might be brown sugar, and the sixth one might be honey, and the seventh one might be sorbitol, and the eighth one might be aspartame, and pretty soon you got a lot of sweetener going into your body. And you do not want the artificial sweeteners. You want something as basic as it gets. The only cereal I know that does have chemical preservatives is shredded wheat. Inside the box it says the wheat, the whole wheat, and nothing but the wheat. So yeah, you're right. When I buy bread in America, I take off my glasses and look at the ingredients. If I can't read them, I put it back on the shelf. My eyes cannot read that small a print. If I've got to put the glasses on, I'm going to read things I don't want in my body. I want things big enough that they could put it big. And I say, yes, that's my type of bread. Anyway, this happened at a prison. This happened at a prison in Ohio where the psychologist in the prison, her name is Barbara Reed, she says, we need to do something here. Let's take all this sugary junk food out of the prison. Now the warden thought, the guy in charge thought, that's going to cause a riot, but we'll let you try this out. They took everything that had sugar out of the prison. Well, what happened? 82% less fighting was going on. 77% less stealing from each other. 65% less malicious horseplay, and 55% less refusal to obey orders. It got better, and these were criminals. Can you imagine how much sweeter things would be in your home if you got rid of the sugar in your home? The same Barbara Reed did another study. She was saying, is there a behavior, a connection with diet and behavior? And she looked at some of the major behaviors that we deal with, things like depression, memory losses, tired all the time, violent mood swings. She looked at all of those things, and they found there's 3 things. They've eliminated 3 things. You get rid of all of those problems, nightmares and all. And here they are. First one, eliminate sugary junk foods. Second one, eliminate anything that contains caffeine. Third one, remove all refined carbohydrates. The white pasta, the white sugar, the white rice, all the things that have been refined. They found that when they removed those things, all those problems disappeared. And all of those problems are functions of the frontal lobe. They're behaviors coming from the frontal lobe. We're damaging the frontal lobes by the things we're putting into our bodies. Mental illness is a big problem. Let's go back to 1400. We're looking at the total population of, this is in Europe now, because we didn't have too many people in America back in 1400, and the amount of sugar per person consumed. That's that little tiny green sliver of light, color there. And next to that is the amount of schizophrenia that they were identifying in the population. Notice it's very, well, there it is, very, very small amount. Now let's go 300 years later, 1700. Still, the orange bar is basically the total population. Sugar consumption had gone way up. How about schizophrenia? It had risen proportionally. Sugar. And here's what they find out today. People who have schizophrenia, that split personality, and basically any mental illness. Here's what they found. The people who have that live on a caffeine and a sugar diet, refined food diet. That's the type of a diet that they have. That's what's giving them their problem. If you know somebody with mental problems, 2 things. You got to get them off of all refined foods and caffeine, and then get them outside exercising. That will take care of most people. And then increase their omega-3 fatty acids. People say, but I like sweet foods. How many of you like sweet foods? I do. Well, God made sweet foods. It's called fruits. Not sweet enough? Then get dried fruits. That concentrates the sugar. There was an elementary school in a state in America, and a teacher decided to do an experiment with her children. She got 2 cages of mice, okay? The 1 cage of mice, they fed those mice just good mouse food, grains, dried fruits. They enjoyed it very much. The other group of mice were given junk food. That was the only difference. The mice who were receiving mouse food, very gregarious, they'd like to be together, they would sleep in a little ball, they'd play together, everything was great. And they kept their cage pretty neat too. The group that was eating the junk food, they would sort of sit in the corner eyeing each other, and every once in a while they'd run out and they'd fight. And one day they got in a big fight, they killed one of their cage mates, and they ate it. Yeah, pretty traumatic for elementary school students, but that's what happened. Well, in the same city, there was a high school. It was the worst high school ever. Fighting, the students would fight, they'd fight with their teachers. Very few students ever graduated from this school. It was a school for losers. It was so bad, they hired a policeman to patrol the hallways. But the same woman, Barbara Reed, who did the study with the prison and diet behavior, she went to this school and she says, look, we'd like to, she and her husband, she says, we want to take over the food in the school. We will pay for it. And the guy says, great, you pay for it. We don't have enough money anyway. First thing they did, they removed all the vending machines from the schools. Now, I don't know if it's Japan or the Philippines, wherever you're from, they got vending machines, but in America, you got vending machines lining the walls. And the children eat there all day long, and there's nothing good in there. They got rid of those. Second thing, they went down to the cafeteria. Anything with a preservative or a flavoring or a coloring that was artificial, they took it out of the food. Third thing they did is they gave them a basic whole food, plant-based diet, a little bit of meat as a garnish, but that was all they did. Within 2 days, the whole school was changed. The students were learning. It became one of the most popular schools in the entire city. As a matter of fact, that study started 20, 25 years ago. The experiment is still going on. It's the most popular school you can go to now because everything is going good. We can do this. We can do this in our homes. We've got to do this in our homes. Another thing, we talked about omega-3 fatty acids last night. These things are good for the brain. It's vital for a developing child's brain. It's vital for all of our brains. But if you have an omega-3 is called a fatty acid. And it is what's called an essential. Omega-3, omega-6, omega-9 are essential fatty acids. And so that means you've got to get them from an outside source. If you're low on your essential fatty acids, it's going to cause behavior changes. It can be diagnosed as ADHD. It causes an unbalanced mind, and the list goes on and on. All right, those are a few things that happen when you put the things through the mouth. And I really think I want to go on and talk about things that go through the eyes because it has a profound effect upon things going through the eyes. There is a principle. It's a biblical principle, but it doesn't matter whether it's Bible or not. It goes. It says, by beholding, we become changed into the same image. So let me just take it a little bit differently. It's going to be in English. It's not going to be this way in the Japanese, but I've sort of changed some words. What we behold, we become. You behold the right things, you become the right type of a person. You behold the wrong things, you're going to become the wrong type of person. And our children are being brought up beholding the wrong things. Like cartoons. Cartoons. Children sit there and they watch this stuff, and then when it's over, the mother wonders, why are my children fighting? Why are they fighting? By beholding, they became changed. And now it goes beyond that. Now we got these video games which are so violent. I've never played one, don't even want to play one, but it's nothing but violence. And it makes a child who watches them equally as violent. Watching television. Now this, I know we don't watch much television anymore, but it's the same as watching something on a computer screen because it's got the same function. It makes a person less intelligent. It makes a person less creative. A child cannot entertain themselves anymore. If you want to see something amazing, go to countries where there's no television. I spent a lot of time in Africa. An African child does not have, they don't have electricity or running water. They don't have all the conveniences that we have, but you know, they've got toys. You know how they get the toys? They make them. They find bits of wire and bottle caps, and they make their own toys. This kid's got this great big truck. He's got in his hand a steering column. He can steer the truck as he walks. It's amazing what they can do. And they can play with these things for hours. If they want to play soccer, you know how they can't afford a soccer ball. You know what they do? The ubiquitous plastic bag. They'll find a plastic bag and they'll ball it up. Then they'll find another one and they'll ball it up. And they keep wrapping the plastic bags together until they got a soccer ball. And that's what they play soccer with. Yeah. Those kids. Another thing, if you've ever been to Africa, you got all these big termite mounds. They'll go to the termite mounds, they'll knock a big chunk out of it because it's clay, which the ants have brought up, the termites have brought up because it's hard. Then they'll soak it in water, make it into pliable clay, and they will form their toys, sit them in the sunshine. Now they've got beautiful toys that they're creative. I don't know what children are going to do if the electricity ever goes off here and the internet's no longer working. Television promotes daydreaming. It is hypnotic. I have 3 grandchildren, and my daughter, unfortunately, allowed them to watch a lot of television when they were young. Have you ever watched a child watching television? They don't even blink. And so what I would do, here's the TV, and they're right there, I would do this. You know what they would do? Not even blinking, because they were hypnotized. Well, that's a beta pattern. You know, beta patterns are good. Hopefully, some of you are in gamma pattern. Gamma pattern is when you're really, if you were hooked up to an EEG, writing a gamma pattern, which means you are really thinking hard. You'll pass the test tomorrow night. But most of you are probably in a beta pattern, which is a good one. That's a social pattern when you're communicating with somebody. But then there is the alpha pattern. The alpha pattern is what you go into when you do yoga. You know, you sit there in a position, do your mantra, and empty your mind. How many of you want an empty mind? We don't want, why do we do it on purpose then? It's crazy. It's also the pattern we get into when we are asleep. That's alpha pattern. I always wonder, how do they know when their stop comes up? How do they sound asleep, and then the train stops and they get up and get off. And they've been sleeping for the last 10 stops. It's the same pattern the body writes when you're watching the television. Your frontal lobe is turned off and it's all going inside. Reduced ability to concentrate when you're watching television a lot. But one of the scarier things is they found that children who watch television, it's actually shrinking their brains. You need to stay away from it. Destroys the lack of the love for reading, breaks down communication in families, which that's one of the big problems. Waste a huge amount of time, leads to sexual immorality, especially today. What's the subject matter on TV? Crazy stuff. They took a bunch of 3 to 5-year-olds and let them watch the World Cup soccer match. Now, that's just a sporting event. Should be no problem with this. Here's what they found during and after the event. It made the children much more emotional, and it made them much more aggressive because they're watching combat on the field. Might as well just go back to the Roman times in the arena. There was a school in either North Carolina or South Carolina. It was a Christian school, 500 students. Had a lot of problems in there. Well, one night the headmaster, he had a dream, and he was shown 2 things he needed to do. So the next day, he went to the school and he wrote a letter, sent it home to all the parents. And this is what he said in the letter. No child can any longer be enrolled in this school if they eat refined carbohydrates and they watch television. You know what happened? Immediately, they lost half their students. And they lost all their problems. And a few months later, they had 500 students again. And no problems. See, parents want their children in safe environments. There is a researcher, this is very interesting. I read the book, a researcher did a study, and the name of the study was On Killing. Killing. It was a book on killing. But not like we would think about, what's happening in Chicago and Detroit and all these things. It was a study of the wars America's been in and how many soldiers actually aimed a weapon at another human being with a conscious thought of taking their life. In Vietnam, you just put it on full automatic, start. They weren't trying to kill anybody, just trying to just shoot the gun. So what he did was he collected letters, old letters that soldiers had written home about, and battle reports and books written later on. He did some really close research. All right, the first war he started with was the American Revolutionary War. He found out that 10% of the soldiers actually aimed their weapon at another human being with a conscious thought of killing them. Just 10%. The War of 1812, same thing, 10%. And it went on from there. The Mexican War, the Civil War, which was a terrible war, the First World War, the Second World War, the Korean War, it was all 10%. What was the next war? My generation's war, Vietnam. So the next war was Vietnam. What was the percentage of men who actually aimed it to take a life in Vietnam? According to his research, 90%. What changed? What changed in America between between Korea, 50 to 53, and 65 through 72, or really 75, that's when I was there. What changed? Huh? No. Television. Television came up. And if anyone was growing up in the 50s and the 60s, you watched Westerns. And every single, matter of fact, here's three of them. Maverick, no, that wasn't Maverick. Guy in the middle, Gunsmoke. At the beginning of every show, he's walking out there and there's another guy, and they draw, and then the guy falls down dead. Every single time you watched it. As a matter of fact, in my generation growing up, every single child had guns. They were toy guns, and you played with them. And you said, bang, bang, you're dead. We from the 1950s to Vietnam, we were killing our friends. Pretend like. So when we finally got into the war, it was second nature. But now, the child is sitting there with a video game which is much more graphic, killing thousands of people a day. And we wonder why we got so many problems in our society, especially the mass killings that we have going on in America today. It's crazy. It's not about guns. We need to ban television. We need to ban these cartoons. The cartoons at one time were pretty innocent. Now, they're beyond the pale. Beyond the pale. The video games. I mean, the first video game I saw was Pokemon. Pokemon is how could people play it there? I don't know. But now, it's so far beyond that. Little story to end off this little section here. Detroit, Michigan, two young boys. Mother, single parent. Well, she was married at one time when she was 13, but found out her husband had a second family. Raising them in poverty, never went on welfare. She worked to take care of these boys. Trouble was, the boys spent a lot of time in front of the television. And they were not growing up right. As a matter of fact, the one boy was voted the dumbest boy in the world by his classmates. Just wait a minute now. He was violent temper. But one night, his mother, she got a dream. And she did two things. She told her boys, from now on, you can watch a half-hour television a week and read 2 books, each of you, a week, and write a report and turn it in. They hated that for the first few months. Then he started getting into reading. And she'd look at the reports. They didn't realize she couldn't read. She'd just look at it and make marks, and they kept on doing it. Well, the one boy graduated top of his class, went on to medical school, went on to Yale University, went on to the University of Michigan School of Medicine, became the youngest pediatric neurosurgeon ever, 32 years of old at Johns Hopkins, as Ben Carson. Amazing. All because of that sweet mother of his. Seventh-day Adventist, by the way. If you teach a child to read, you open the world to them. They can travel the Grand Canyon. They can go beyond the clouds. They can go to Kilimanjaro. They can go to the 7 seas. You know, if we teach our children and provide them with good reading material, there is very questionable reading material out there. Anything in the Harry Potter series, it deals with witches and goblins and who knows what else. And this is not a healthy thing for a child's mind to be feasting on. Because again, by beholding, we become changed. And it found out that after this particular series of books and then the movies that followed it, a lot of interest was created in the occult. Children wanting to be witches. There's something wrong in my mind about that. So that's a little bit about things that we do, lifestyle things we do will affect our frontal lobe, our character and our behavior. We're going to take a little break and then we'll see how far we can get into this power of vegetarianism. I'll show you a few famous vegetarians that might surprise you. Not just vegetarians, vegan vegetarians, whole food, plant-based vegetarians. You might think they're all going to look like me. No, they don't all look like me. I wish I looked like some of them. But let's take a little break, then we'll jump into this last part. It's going to have to be short because we're 42 minutes from being done. Nothing. Well, oh, it is something. I guess it just doesn't take my finger. Okay, I'm really happy to see so many people here tonight. We started with 2. It's gotten a lot more crowded, but this is an important part of the program. It's talking about vegetarianism, but I'm going to answer a question before I even start, because this is the question I will always get, and this is what people will say. Jesus ate fish. You ever heard that question? Yeah, right. But there's a difference. One of the differences is the water that Jesus took the fish out of was different than the water we have today. I've been to the Sea of Galilee, I've been to Israel, and the water is not looking all that clean. We've got so much stuff going into the water today, and anything that lives in the water is going to be biomagnifying the toxins in the water in their particular body. We got factory runoff, we got agricultural runoff, we got so many things going into the aquifer. And here in Japan, you got another little treat for the water. What might that be? You ever heard of Fukushima Daiichi? Putting all that radioactive isotopes into the water, because they've got to keep the reactor cool. They keep it cool by running ocean water around the reactor right back out into the ocean, and it's taken stuff with it. Let's just talk about this thing called biomagnification. Let's say you've got some water. Somehow or other, you got some pure water somewhere, sometime in the past. But now we got the buildup of the PCBs, mercury, DDT. In fact, we don't use DDT anymore in America, but we sell it to other countries to use DDT, so it's in the water. They can find DDT in every organism from the deepest trenches in the ocean. They're going to find traces of DDT, an insecticide. So now we're going to start building up in the water these different things because of what we're putting into the water. I think I'm looking at my Japanese slide. Just a minute. Let me get away from my Japanese program and get my English program. I've got to find out where I put it. Seems like every night I've got some other snafu that I've got to go through. Extra meetings. Yeah, extra meetings. Sorry about this. I should have been getting this ready between classes. Here we go. Okay, so we're going to go getting some build up. We got this thing called biomagnification, and this I'm going to explain what that is. Ocean water, clean it first. You start building things up. You get all this stuff dumping in. Then we start getting the pollutants, and you're going to have living in ocean water algae. These little plants that live in the water, which are going to start biomagnifying, taking these pollutants into their little cells. Then you've got herbivorous fish who basically live off the algae and other thing in the water, and it's going to start magnifying it in their bodies. Then you've got your carnivorous fish who are eating the herbivorous fish, like the tuna. Now you're going to get more biomagnification. What's the next stop on the food chain? It's you. How much toxins now are going to be in that fish that you're putting into your body, which are going to biomagnify in your body, especially things like mercury. I mentioned the other night how probably 18 years ago when I was here in Tokyo, in Japan, I was in Tokyo, a big article came out that women who were pregnant, lactating, and had small children don't serve cold water fish, which tuna is, because of the high levels of mercury. And we talked about last night how mercury will attach to your nervous system. It collects in the brain. We also talked about the dangers of vaccinations, all that is in those things, especially mercury. Tylenol. What does Tylenol do? Now we know we never, ever give an aspirin to a child, right? Causes a thing called Reye syndrome. But we give them Tylenol. Tylenol blocks down the detoxification channel of the liver. The liver's purpose is to detoxify the body. You take Tylenol, you're no longer detoxifying the body. Now what are you doing? You're building up toxins in the body. And every single one of us are toxic. That's why it's good to go to the onsen every while and sweat some of that stuff out. Aluminum, that's another thing that we are becoming toxic with, and it collects in the brain. We talked about this last night, antiperspirants. They're aluminum based. It stops you from sweating. Aluminum pots and pans, aluminum foil. How many of you have ever had the amalgam fillings? Got the mercury, we got the silver, we got the tin, we got the copper. Get those things out of your head. How do we get the metals out of our body? This is a review from last night. We chelate. We take things into our body that will latch onto the heavy metals and take them out of our body. One of those things is pectin. We find that in the skins of fruits and vegetables. We find that in sunflower seeds. We find that on the white stuff inside the peelings of citrus fruits. Eat the white stuff. Get the metals out of your body. Cilantro or coriander, same thing. It takes out all the heavy metals from your body. And I read a recent article, if you take 400 milligrams of cilantro a day, in 3 weeks, you've taken almost all the heavy metals out of your body. That's significant, folks, because heavy metals is one of the big things causing many of our problems, and I don't doubt that one of them is going to be Alzheimer's disease. Parsley will take out mercury. I got parsley there again. Your cruciferous vegetables, cabbage, broccoli, cauliflower, kohlrabi, kale, all these things will latch on and take heavy metals out of the body. High fiber foods will take heavy metals out of the body. I know I talk a lot about it, but we've got too many heavy metals in our body because we're living in a society that is fixated on putting heavy metals in our environment. Okay, back to nutrition. We need food for 3 main purposes. First one is provide fuel for all of our activities. Second one is we need things to help maintain our body functions and basically building materials, muscles and bones. And then we need substances that will regulate our cellular action in all of our processes in the Bible. In order to do that, we need 6 basic nutrients. If I ask you to name them, most of you would name 5, but you would probably not think about the 6th one. First one is going to be protein. That's your building material. Second one is going to be carbohydrate. That's your fuel. Third one is going to be fat. Fat is how you store your fat-soluble vitamins, A, D, E, and K. It is a way to store energy when you eat excess food. Some of it stored as glycogen. The rest is going to be stored as fat. And we've all got, even I've got fat on my body, and it's good to have some. It's good for padding. It's good for insulation. Those were macronutrients, big nutrients. There's one more macronutrient. Does anyone know what that one is? That's water. Now you say, well, there's no nutrient in water. Try living without it and see how long you're going to live. Basically, you're going to live about a week if you don't drink water. Vitamins, exceedingly important. These are micronutrients. You just need small amounts of these things. And then minerals. That's what your bones are made up of, minerals. Lots of minerals in the body. You got gold in your body. You got all kinds of minerals. Now, we're going to look at 3 popular myths. Now, the Japanese side, I've got 3 Japanese myths. For the American side and English-speaking side, we got what we have our own myths. And in American myths, we got Santa Claus, we got the Easter Bunny, and we got the Tooth Fairy. In Japan, you got Kasune, Karen, and Tatsu. Okay, it doesn't really matter, but we're going to look at these 3 things. Now, Santa Claus is going to be talking about protein. The Easter Bunny is going to be talking about calcium, and the Tooth Fairy is going to be talking about vitamin B12. Now, what do I call these myths? If you just say you tell somebody, I'm going to become a total vegetarian, those are the three arguments they're going to bring up. Where are you going to get your protein? That's a myth. Where are you going to get your calcium? That's a myth. Where are you going to get a B12? That's a myth also. So let's start with protein. We know that muscles are made from protein. That was discovered in 1880 by a man named Liebig. When he discovered that muscles were made from protein, he figured we need to eat a whole lot of protein to get a whole bunch of big muscles. One of his students, a guy named Carl Voigt, studied a group of people, saw how much protein they consumed, and said that's how much we all need to consume. He studied German coal miners back in the 1890s, down in a hole with a pick in the hand. They were eating 120 grams of protein a day. He says that's the benchmark for all of us. Do any of you work as hard as a German coal miner in 1890? Probably not. You're toxic with protein if you are eating that much protein. Here's the myth. The best protein comes from animals. And another part of that myth is vegetables have inferior amounts of protein. Let me just ask you this. What is protein? The basic line, protein is amino acids. Amino acids are the building blocks of protein. There's 20 amino acids. There's 8 that are called essential amino acid. That means your body cannot build these amino acids themselves. They've got to get the essentials from a whole, from an outside source. Your body is able, your liver is able to extract all these essentials from a vegetarian diet. So we're going to look at some particular vegetarian foods here. On the right is the RDA, the recommended daily allowance. Now let me just explain something about the RDA. The RDA, when they figure out how much do we need, who are they talking about? Are they talking about you? Or the pastor's little son? Or an old lady? But they say this is the RDA for everybody. But another problem with this is they're not sure, so here's what they do. Whenever they come up with what they think might be what they need, they will double the figure. That way they're going to get enough. So basically, what you're looking at right there is probably twice as much of those essential amino acids you need every single day. Okay? Now we're going to look at some foods. We're going to look at, how about the sweet potato? Does it have enough essential amino acids? Yeah. Now, if you're eating a broad range of fruits and vegetables, you're getting all the essentials that you need. Just a regular old potato. Now, there's about 150 grams of protein in milligrams of protein in a potato. You need basically about 28 to 30 grams of protein a day. So you're partway there. How about brown rice? Not hakamai, you need genmai. Brown rice, good amount of essential amino acids. Tomatoes. Did you know that was a high protein food? Oats. A lot of essential amino acids. Corn. Broccoli. Beans. Is this inferior protein? This is not inferior protein. Now, a carnivore is not a vegetarian. That's why they call them a carnivore. But there's something about a carnivore. In order for a carnivore to get its essential amino acid, it's got to eat a vegetarian. They won't, if they kill a hyena, they won't eat it because they're carnivores too. They've got to eat a vegetarian. And where did the vegetarian get its essential amino acids? By eating the grass that's out there on the veldt. And they've got plenty of it. So my recommendation is leave out the middleman and get your essential amino acids from the source. University of Tokyo Hospital. Does anyone know the name of the disease when you don't have enough protein in your body? Does anyone know the name of the disease? It's called kwashiorkor. You know why you've never heard of it? There's none in any of your countries. You find it in countries where there's starvation going on. So basically, how many patients do you think are in Tokyo University Hospital with kwashiorkor right now? None. But how many do you think are in that hospital that are taking dialysis every week, 3 times a week? How many are in there with complications from osteoporosis? How many are in there with cancer? All of these things caused by too much protein in the animal protein, too much animal protein in the diet. Let me show you some famous vegetarians. Mr. Universe, there on the right. That was 2014, Mr. Universe. He's the guy with the carrot in his mouth. Serena and Venus Williams. They're both total vegetarian. Matter of fact, one is a raw food vegetarian because she's trying to fight some of her issues that she has. Here's some certain bodybuilders. Everyone are whole food, plant-based vegetarians. It's a myth that you've got to have a lot of animal protein in order to build your body. When you eat animal protein, what else are you getting besides the protein? How about the uric acid? How about the steroids? How about the hormones? How about the antibiotics? How about the cholesterol? How about the microorganisms? You're getting all of it. And how about the possibility of getting a prion? Does anyone know what a prion is? A prion is a renegade protein that when it gets into your body or even gets on anything, you cannot kill it. 1,000 degrees will not kill it. Matter of fact, when a person dies of a dementia in America, they no longer do autopsies on the brain. Why? Because they got to take all the instruments and destroy them because they cannot kill a prion. And if you eat a prion, it may sit in your body 20, 30 years, but pretty soon it will start eating holes in your brain. Protein is a myth. How about carbohydrates? I asked a question last night, I'll ask it again tonight. How many of you have heard that you need to eat a low carbohydrate diet? Carbohydrate. Anyone heard that carbohydrates are bad? I agree 100%. It's the type of carbohydrate that they're talking about. And this is most of the types of carbohydrates that people are eating, refined carbohydrates. But the body lives on carbohydrates. That's where we get our fuel. So we need to be getting our, whoops, took a long time to get there. That's where we need to be getting our protein, our carbohydrates from. Yeah, now to go to this guy. This guy eats a lot of protein. Fastest land animal in the world. It's called a cheetah. How long can it run that fast? Between 80 and 110 kilometers per hour. It can run that fast 20 to 30 seconds tops. What's he chasing? He's chasing a vegetarian who eats a lot of carbohydrates. If that animal can dodge him long enough, 30 seconds, 20 seconds, it can run for a couple of hours to get out of the whole territory. So they did an experiment with humans. 3 groups of athletes. First group, they put them on a protein diet. That's what people say, got to have proteins. And then they put them on an exercise regimen to see how long they could go. After being on that protein diet for a period of time, they were able to do the exercise for 57 minutes and they ran out of steam. Second group, they had a protein carbohydrate, 50-50 diet. Same exercise, how long did they do it? They went 1 hour and 54 minutes. Then they had the third group. They were the carbohydrate group. Same exercise, they went 2 hours and 47 minutes. How many of you have ever run endurance? How many have ever run a marathon? Okay, the marathon. Did you eat a lot of protein before the marathon? You carb load, not protein, you carb loaded. For a week, 2 weeks, you are loading with carbs because that's going to convert to glucose. Now, can you turn protein and fat into fuel? You ever heard of the Atkins diet? The Atkins diet is a protein-fat diet, plenty of fuel. Let me give you this example. Let's say you go down to the beach. You like to have it's getting cool, it's getting around December time, you got a little fire on the beach. You like to sit next to the fire, feel the warmth and smell the wood burning. Well, let's say you don't have any wood. Do tires burn? They'd burn really good. Do you want to sit next to the burning tire? It's making so many toxins. Same thing, when we burn the wrong fuel in our body, we make ketones. We become toxic. So basically, the body wants to live on carbohydrates, breaks down into glucose. That's the fuel the body wants. The body can make it out of fat, but it's not going to be healthy. So anyway, protein, that's a myth. I threw a little bit of carbohydrates in there because we're talking about nutrition. Now, how about calcium? Another myth. Where do people say you've got to get your calcium from? You got to get it from a cow. First of all, how much calcium is in your body if you weighed it out? All right, I got it right here. It's between 1/2 and 1.35 kilos, or 1.5, 1.2 and 2.5 pounds of calcium in your whole body. Basically found in your bones, 95% in your bones and your teeth. What all is it used for? It's used for many things. It's used for the clotting mechanism. If you do not have enough calcium in your body, you're not going to be able to get a good clot going. To see the mechanism of a blood clot, to me, is absolutely amazing. I love it. Another thing it's good for is brain functioning. If you're not having good calcium sources, your brain's not going to function right, your neurological system. Another one is the enzyme makeup. If you're not getting a good source of calcium, your enzymes aren't working. So we got to get calcium. Now, here's the deal. Still talking, okay. If you take whatever amount of calcium you're going to take in today, only about 20 or 30% of that calcium is going to be absorbed by the body. Where's the rest going to go? It's going to go down the toilet. But how does it get to the toilet? Where does it have to go to get into the toilet? It's got to go through your kidneys. All right, now calcium is a mineral. If you're eating high amounts of calcium and you're dumping large amount of calcium, what's going to happen in your kidneys to all those little calcium crystals? They're going to start coming together. And what does that form? Stones. They say if a man is trying to pass a kidney stone, he knows what a woman's going through when she's having a baby. It's caused by all the calcium that we're dumping. Okay, if you're not getting enough calcium, it's going to cause people get osteoporosis and bone problems, but this is talking about the wrong type of calcium. This is what we're doing. A cow's milk. What's a cow's milk made for? It's made for baby cows. When a cow drops a calf, how long does it take that calf to double its birth weight? Oh, no one's going to know. It's going to be 47 days. Okay? How much calcium is in cow's milk? We're talking about 250 milliliters. It's going to be about 250 milligrams of calcium in a cup of cow's milk. Now, let's look at human milk, which was made for human babies. How long does it take a human baby to double its birth weight? About 6 months. You do not want your baby doubling its birth weight in 47 days. How much calcium is in mother's milk? The same quantity, only 80 milligrams. Now, God made this milk for a particular purpose. It's made for baby cows, and this one's made for baby humans. Let's get some really high-powered milk. Rat milk has 11 times more calcium and protein than human milk. So, from the time a rat is born to the time it reaches full physical maturity is 5 months. From the time a human baby is born to the time it reaches full physical maturity, it's going to be about 17 years. If we speed up that process, we speed up the degeneration of the entire body. So, the first 6 months, a baby's going to double its birth weight. The rest of its life, it will never do that again. So that first 6 months, the baby's growing faster than it will ever go before, or again. So how much then protein, since the baby's growing so fast in that 6 months, how much protein is found in human milk? 0.8 to 0.9%. Most of it's water. A lot of it's fat. 0.8 to 0.9%. We don't need that much. Let's just compare human milk with cow's milk. We're not going to go down the graph too much. We've got calcium, phosphorus, sodium, and potassium. Don't even have calcium on there, protein on there. But look at how much human milk has compared to how much animals have, the cows have. Cows, 430% more than human milk. Apparently we don't need all that calcium. Phosphorus, 840% more than human milk. Sodium, 350% more. People with high blood pressure, you got to be off of all dairy products. Sodium is so high in dairy products. Potassium, 340% higher than it is in cow's milk, than it is in human milk. We don't need cow's milk, especially today. You got every other kind of milk you can check your stick at. When a person's on a high protein diet, it's protein and calcium are on a homeostatic basis. They're in a balance. But if somebody eats a high protein meal like everyone's going to be eating on the fourth Thursday of November in America, called Thanksgiving Day, eat that poor turkey, lots of amino acids in that thing. When they eat a high animal protein diet, protein goes up, the body's going to dump its calcium. And that's called osteoporosis. A high phosphorus diet does the same thing. A high sodium diet does the same thing. Come on. A high potassium diet does the same thing. All from cow's milk. When I was in the 4th grade, I fell out of a tree. I landed arm first, and I broke these 2 bones just up like this. They took me to the hospital, they set the bones, and then they told me, you got to start drinking more milk. Well, I started drinking lots more milk. In the 7th grade, I was in a fight with this big fat boy, and he fell on me, and he broke my foot. Took me to the hospital, put a cast on my foot, told me to drink more milk. July the 28th, 1968, sophomore in college, I was hit head on on my motorcycle. Car was coming at me, I slid sideways, got smashed between the car, and just broke my leg all up, fixed my leg, and when they started telling me about milk, I said, stop. I'm drinking more milk than a human should have to drink. You should have told me, don't fall out of trees, don't fight fat boys, and look out for girls in big cars if you're on your motorcycle. Here's what they're telling us. California Tissue Institute, calcium intake shows no protection. It has no effect on broken bones. Now we're talking about dairy calcium. We're not talking about the calcium sources I'm going to be talking about. We're talking about animal calcium has no protection. Another one, this is from the International Journal of Osteoporosis. A low intake of calcium, less than 1 glass of milk daily, has no significant effect upon broken bones. So the question is, where then do I get my calcium from? Same place the cow gets hers from, and every other animal gets it from the plants in its environment. Figs, greens, especially, look at the greens. 300 to 516 milligrams from a cup of greens. How much is in a glass of milk? I just got done telling you before. Whoops, there it is. 288 milligrams. Get back there. 288 milligrams in a glass of milk. You've got more in a cup of greens than that. Eat your greens. Eat your tofu. Eat your okra. Eat your dried vegetables. Eat your onions. Eat your cruciferous vegetables. You're getting all the calcium that you'd ever desire. But you also need vitamin D. Vitamin D is your sunshine vitamin. Without vitamin D, calcium cannot get into the bones. We got to get more sunshine or supplement. Magnesium. Without magnesium, you're not going to build strong bones. So we get magnesium from the foods you're seeing here and many other sources, getting your vitamin D from the sunshine or taking a supplement. And then you got to get a daily shakeup of your bones every day. If you're not stressing your bones, they're not going to build the bones. Just like muscles, you're not going to build muscles without lifting weights. If you're not doing weight-bearing exercise, your bones aren't going to get stronger. That's why people just retire. They sit down and they wonder why they get osteoporosis. That's all they can get. They're not stressing their bones. All right, dairy products. It's the #1 food allergen in the world. Dairy products may play a major role in the development of allergies, asthma, sleep difficulties, migraine headaches, and a pile of other things. Why? People are sensitive to either casein or lactose or maybe both. People from European descent, about 50% will be sensitive to these. If you're from Asiatic descent, 90 to 95% are going to be sensitive to casein and lactose. If you are from African descent, you're looking at 95 to 100% sensitivity. Why? Because it wasn't a part of their dietary down through the centuries. We adapt. Our bodies will adapt to our diets, just like our bodies adapt to water. If you're in America, you go to Mexico, they say, don't drink the water. Why? Because our bodies are not used to what's in their water. Most infants develop symptoms of allergic reaction, rejection to cow's milk before 1 year of age. We'll be talking about this tomorrow night when we talk about type 1 diabetes. How does it show up? Now, I'm going to show you some symptoms of the allergies. If you know a child with any of these symptoms, your solution is simple. First, about 50 to 70% are going to have some type of skin rashes. Okay? You see it all the time. 50 to 60% are going to have GI, gastrointestinal problems, upset stomach, anywhere in the gastrointestinal tract. Diarrhea could be one of them. 20 to 30% we're going to have respiratory. Asthma will fall into that category right there. Children who always have problems with their eyes, runny nose, earaches, sore throats. Easiest way, and here's what I tell people, do this one thing, eliminate milk. 10 days, get off of it completely. And I'll tell you, in most cases, they'll get completely well. Then they've got a choice. Stay on it or go back to the doctor and keep taking the medications to fight it. My sister takes a medication for allergies. She's allergic to cats. She sleeps with 3 of them in her bed. She likes cats. Some people like ice cream. They don't care what they have to take care of their allergies. They're going to eat it. But there's another problem with dairy products, especially for young children. Milk causes intestinal bleeding. If you have intestinal bleeding, that's going to cause anemia. Now, anemia is not good to begin with, but today, because of places like Chernobyl and Fukushima Daiichi, you've got things that are in the environment, like plutonium, that will take the place of iron in your body. And now you're going to have radioactive isotopes. You do not, that's plutonium-238 and 239. Okay, Japan, there's been a study going on since 1946. A demographic study on how fast children are growing, disease rates, all the different things. They looked at one slice of the study between 1950 and 1975, looking at one factor, and that was dairy intake. Before World War II, Japanese had very low dairy intakes. But in 1945, when the MacArthur plan started, or the Marshall Plan started, and basically America helped Japan get back on the feet, we brought in all of our dairy products. Don't thank us for that. We don't deserve thanks. Between 1950, the average Japanese person was eating 5.5 pounds of dairy products per person per year. A year. 1975, it had gone up to 117.5 pounds per person per year. But now they compared that with disease rates. In the same period of time, strokes increased 38%. Heart disease increased 35%. Breast cancer increased 77%. Colon cancer increased 77%. Lung cancer increased 300%. But there's something else. Something did decrease, but you don't want it decreasing. And that was the age of maturation or puberty of young girls. 1950, the young girl reached puberty at 15.2 years. 25 years later, it was down to 12.2 years. That is not a good thing. The more periods a woman has in her lifetime, the greater her risk of breast cancer. That's why women who have more children have less breast cancer, because when they're pregnant, they're not having periods. This child's going to have 36 more periods in her life because she started her periods earlier, 3 years earlier than her mother did. All right, another thing in dairy products. There's a thing called IGF-1, insulin-like growth factor 1. Our body produces it just fine, but the trouble is cows also produce it. We're drinking cow's milk. We are getting it. And what does this IGF-1 do? It's good for us in the amount that we make it. IGF-1 is very critical in the growth of breast cancer. This is a woman I work with in Taiwan with breast cancer. It took her life. She loved the dairy products. This is a young man I worked with in Zimbabwe. That's a tumor on his knee. It had been surgically removed in September. I took this picture in December, 3 months later. IGF-1 can increase the growth of cancer by a factor of 10 times. So my recommendation, we'll talk more about this tomorrow night, but if you know somebody with cancer, no dairy products. 2, no sugar, and I'll explain that one tomorrow night. There's many things, if you have cancer, you just stop these things. All right, so we got the myth of protein, the myth of calcium, and now the third myth. If a dog bites a man, it's not big news. It happens every day, right? What about if a man goes around biting dogs? That might get a little bit more attention in the newspaper. Same way with vitamin B12. If a meat eater gets a B12 deficiency, you'll never hear about it. And let me tell you, the majority of people with B12 deficiencies are omnivores. They're meat eaters. But you let a total whole food, plant-based vegetarian get a B12 deficiency, and it's going to be front page news, especially if their child gets it. Many people, you can get your B12 from animal products, right? What else can you get from animal products? Can you get cholesterol, which is going to cause high blood pressure? Are you going to get steroids nowadays? You're going to get homocysteine, which we talked about last night, which affects your mental function. This is amino acid that's found in high quantities in meat. Here's the problem with B12. When we measure B12, we measure it in the blood. Well, that's the only way to measure it, right? But that's not where your blood stores its B12. Where is B12 stored in your body? It's stored in your liver. How much B12 is stored in your liver? Between 3 and 5 milligrams. Now, that doesn't mean much unless you know how much B12 we need every day. Does anyone know? 1 to 3 micrograms. That's 1,000th of a milligram. Micrograms. So if you have, let's say you've only got 3 milligrams of B12 stored in your liver, how long is that going to last, taking, let's say, 2 micrograms out a day? Years. And somewhere along that line, you're going to get some B12 in your body. We have fortified foods with B12 in it, but there's other ways of getting it. But here's one way the body does it. When you eat food, Digestion, carbohydrates begins here, proteins in the stomach, fats in your duodenum. When the food gets into the duodenum, and there's always going to be some fat in your food, good fat, bound fat. Eat a peanut, you just ate fat. It gets down into the duodenum, it's going to have to break down, so the body's going to send some enzymes down there. And when it does, some B12 that's stored there is going to come out. It's going to come out and go through your intestinal tract, all right? It's going to get to the cecum, and at that point, some of it's going to go out of the body, but some of it's going to go back up into the liver. So you're constantly recirculating the B12. Now, we talked about bacteria. The bacteria, you make B12 in your own body, but it's too low down. Your body can't take it in the areas in your colon and stuff. So basically, you've got to take it in through the mouth to make it effective. But we'll talk more about it. I'm going to get done here really quick. Let me ask you this. Does a cow have B12? Does it produce B12? It doesn't. Where does B12 come from? It comes from bacteria living in the cow. Does a cow take B12 supplements? No, a cow eats the grass, which is contaminated with B12. And if you eat organic food, you may just well be eating some B12 because it's growing on the food. Let's say you go to a place where it's safe, it's been rated organic, they haven't sprayed it with anything, and you buy some grapes. I was in Okatake, somewhere, something in Japan last week, and they've got the best grapes. Just take a grape, an organic grape, and you eat it. It's going to have B12 on it, and it gets down, and now you can use that B12. The risk of dying from heart disease. Now, this is American statistics. You can extrapolate it for Japan anywhere you want. It's about 1 out of 2 people are going to have fatal heart disease. That's a big risk. Breast cancer, about 1 in 7 women will develop breast cancer. Prostate cancer, about 1 in 6 men will develop prostate cancer. Now, this is, 1 out of 2, 1 out of 7, 1 out of 6. What's the ratio? What's the probability of developing a debilitating B12 deficiency? 1 out of 1 million. And yet, they make that a major story if a B12 deficiency comes upon a vegetarian. Now, some people say, well, I'm going to take some B12 injections. Well, that's fine, but after 2 days, 99.9% of it is out of your body. Of course, you put a lot in there, so it may be enough, but here's my recommendation. If you're worried about B12, get a vegan source of B12 tablet that's sublingual. You put it under your tongue and let it dissolve. I want to do a B12 test right now with y'all. If you're low in B12, what's it going to affect first? Anyone know? Remember, it's a B vitamin. What do B vitamins, all B vitamins affect? Your nervous system. So here's a B12 test. I want you all to take it. Hold up your hand and go quickly between your thumb and your fingers. Good. That's a very fine nervous action there. All right, doing fine. All right, second test. Put your hand out to the side, point your finger, close your eyes, and touch your nose. If you touched your neighbor's nose, maybe you got a B12 problem. If you touched your nose, you've got some good nerves. Third thing, you don't do this right now, you stand on 1 foot. You'll notice when you stand on 1 foot, your foot quivers because you're that fine balance mechanism. See, my foot's saying I got to stay up there. And I got good B12 because I can stand like this for a long time. But if you can't stand on 1 foot, now granted we're not storks, we don't stand around on 1 foot. But if you can't stand on 1 foot for 30 seconds, and especially if you can't do this, you might have your B12 checked. Vegetarians have lower B12 factors. That's okay. But here's what I say. If you're worried about it, supplement. But if you're eating 4 to 5 foods, You're getting it anyway, but here's the problem with fortified foods. They're fortified with B12 and artificial colorings and artificial flavorings and artificial preservatives, all of which are bad for your body. Okay, any questions? I went a little bit over, that's okay, I started late. Any questions about anything we've talked about, or short questions? That's some short questions. Yes, you got a question.
So I know of someone who has nerve damage. What foods can you eat or what?
Okay, what do you do if you have nerve damage? Because there you got to go back and find out what caused the nerve damage. If it was, I once flew from Beijing, China to Moscow with my wallet here, and I never got up. And I was months with the pain because I smashed my sciatic nerve.
It was birth,
It was what?
pregnancy related nerve damage.
The mother? The mother had from birth. And how long's that been?
Years now.
Years. B vitamins, of course, you'd always try to B vitamins, but it depends on just what exactly happened to the nerve. Sometimes there's going to be no recovery. You got to be eating a good source of your essential fatty acids. You got to find some way to maybe repair if she had any damage to the myelin sheath around her nerves. There's foods we can eat for that. I can come up with a little list of things that she might try. But if she's had years of problems, hydrotherapy, we're going to be talking about tomorrow morning. We talked about 3 golden pillars the other night. The one was perfect health requires perfect circulation. If you can improve circulation to the area of the damage, you can repair the damage. And charcoal poultices. I've known people who were in comas, putting charcoal poultices on their head, brought them out of comas. Charcoal pulls out whatever might be causing the problem. And you might also have them take an anti-inflammatory because if she's got nerve damage, she's got pain. Take curcuma, turmeric. Yeah, it's one of the best. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Just wondering, I know the best source of vitamin D is the sun.
Is what?
The best source of vitamin D. Vitamin D.
Vitamin D, okay.
It's the sun. But sometimes for some people who do the office work, they do not have enough time to go outside to get the sun. Do you have some supplement or what is something like that?
Yeah, you can, there's plenty of supplements on the market with vitamin D.
Or natural food?
Well, here's the problem. Whenever you buy something in a bottle, you're taking them at their word. See, I mentioned the other night about everybody has faith. When you buy supplements, you've got faith that what they say is in there. But you never know what else is going to be in there. But I have myself supplement with vitamin D. Matter of fact, I forgot to bring them with me, but I'm doing it myself right now because my vitamin D's always been low. And I get a lot of sunshine. Now, in your case, you're saying you just can't get outside and get much sunshine. Even if you did, you'd have to have 90% more sunshine than I would because you got more melanin in your skin. So you need 90% more. But the trouble with that is that even you can get a sunburn. So if I lay out there for 15 minutes and you go, 90% time more than that, you're going to burn your skin, which is going to cause you problems. So try to find the best supplement that you can find and supplement your D. But let me mention something else I mentioned, I think, last night. Maybe it was this evening. When you get your blood test, and it comes back with your vitamin D levels and try to remember what's always low in my body from the liver. Anyway, you look at all these values. Where do those values come from? What are the normal values? They get a big group of people, they take their blood, average them, and say, that's your normal. Well, to me, that's not my normal. I want the very best. And sometimes it's high and sometimes it's low. Get a good supplement, take it, but try to find the time. You need more sunshine, but basically if you have pale skin like me, 10%, 20% of your skin, 10 minutes a day should give me all the vitamin D I need. Okay? You need a lot more than that, but find a time. Find a time. Okay, no, that's a good question. Does it matter what time of day? We've always heard get it in the morning, get it in the evening, because the middle of the day it's more intense because it's coming through less atmosphere. When it cuts diagonally through the atmosphere, it's going through more atmosphere, cutting out a lot of the bad rays. But here's what I say, take it during the high time because it's more intense, you need less of it to get the same effect than you would need from 8 to 10 or from 2 to 4. If you get it from 10 to 2, now you're getting a good amount of the heavy rays, but you need a smaller amount because they are going to be more intense because they've not been filtered out. You need the UVB to help build up, because UVB turns cholesterol. It's a long process in the body, but this UVB taking cholesterol into vitamin D. Okay.
Going back to the behaviors, and you gave us many of the behaviors that are associated with eating visual. Is there any research or any books that we should read on to learn what not to do or eat or look at?
Well, yeah, there's one book. Excitotoxins, a book on excitotoxins. And many of the things I talked about were excitotoxins. MSG is an excitotoxin. And Mercola, Dr. Mercola is the one that has that book. Pretty popular name out there. Mercola, M-E-R-C-O-L-A. But he's got one, excitotoxin, the taste that kills, I think he calls it. Yeah, the taste that kills. Excitotoxins. That would be one good one to go to. There's other books, they don't come to my mind right now. The bottom line is,
I would recommend for the media, there's on Audioverse, there's a presentation series called Media on the Mind.
yeah,
It's mind-blowing.
yeah, Media on the Mind. Yeah, he's done a great, matter of fact, he was passing them out for these DVDs free. I got a set of those things. Yeah. There's good sources out there. Search. Another book I want to recommend that I read some years ago, and I always recommend it, and very few people read it, but those who do say, that changed, that was a changer. It is called The Gift of Pain. The Gift of Pain by Dr. Paul Brand. It'll completely change your whole concept of pain and pain management and how we deal with people. The Gift of Pain. He spent his life working with lepers and people with diabetic neuropathy who have no pain. Very, very compelling. Very easy read. It's an easy, exciting, interesting read. I've read it 2 or 3 times just because it helped me deal with that part of natural medicine, dealing with people in pain. Yes?
You mentioned about the many names that sugar has and the names that we cannot pronounce when we read the label. Sometimes it's written natural flavor. Can you tell anything about it?
About what?
Natural flavors. Like
Just one person answered the question. What was it?
Natural flavors.
Natural flavors.
When it's written natural flavors on the package,
Yeah.
do you know anything about natural flavors?
Well, when you get something that says, let's say you're getting some artificial bacon that says it's got natural flavor. What's more natural than something from the pig? Okay. So basically, you know, I can't really speak to that right this moment. You know, what all those things is. most of those things, when they start talking about natural flavors, it's a red sign, it's a red flag. We've got to get back to eating so much simpler than we are right now. We shouldn't have, you know, if you want a natural flavor, use oregano, use thyme, use oregano. I already said oregano, whatever. Use basil. That's what we need to be putting in our foods. And we should be growing them ourselves. We can have our little kitchen window garden of herbs that we just pluck it and put them fresh into our food. It's so much better. But we've gotten so attached to going in there and buying all these products that are already made for us. And it's dangerous, I think. We need to stay away from them. Well, it's getting late. I've got you 20 minutes over, but I just started 2 hours ago, so I got my time down. So we'll be starting, we're going to have a workshop tomorrow morning from 11 to what time?
From 11:30 to 1 o'clock, we have a natural remedies class tomorrow at the mission.
Okay. You know, last year 2 years ago we did it on a Sunday. It was packed, but that's a Sunday as a whole. Tomorrow night we're talking about cancer and diabetes. But let's say you're not worried about cancer and diabetes. If you know what to do for cancer, you know what to do for every other disease. It's the same thing. We'll just bring up a few extra things. If you know what to do for diabetes, you know what to do for every other disease. We just need to learn the basics. Okay, let's have prayer, and I'm going to let you loose. Okay, Father in heaven, we're thankful for the time we get spend together. I pray that what we've learned, we will practice, we will teach, that we can help other people, and we can be your healing hands in this hurting world. I pray in Christ's name. Amen.